Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk on Japanese foreign policy. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining in the early morning in the weekend. And also, I'm grateful for your having an interest in Japan as well. First of all, I'd like to share my screen with you, and let me do it in this way. Like this, I think. I try to. I try to use a yes. Maybe I think you can show my face within the PowerPoint slides. Is that okay? Okay, thank you very much. And I will use my PowerPoint slide, and I will talk about 40 minutes, and then I will have Q&A, question and answer session with you. Well, first, let me talk about 4 main points, which I like to focus today. Number one, the Indo-Pacific region now becomes the center of global geopolitics. Maybe you are familiar with this fact. Now, we are seeing the importance of the structural confrontation between the United States and China. Number one economy and number two economy, and also Japan is the number 3 economy. So it means that the top 3 economies, United States, China, Japan, are all within the Indo-Pacific region. So it naturally means that the Indo-Pacific region now becomes the center of global politics. In the middle of the 20th century, as you have learned in your history lectures, I suppose, the Atlantic Ocean was the main theater of global politics. Of course, NATO was and perhaps has been the most important military alliance in the world. But nowadays, we are realizing the increasing importance of the relationship between the United States and China, and also structural confrontation between the two global powers. So we now need to understand much more deeply about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region, number one. And number two, Japan has initiated its Indo-Pacific strategy by advancing the FIOP. FIOP is Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision. The Quad, this is a quadrilateral cooperation among the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, the 4 leading democracies in this region. And also the CPTPP. CPTPP is Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, a free trade area in this region. All of these 4 important concepts were actually created by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So Japan has been promoted important visions as well as strategies here in the Indo-Pacific region. The United States and Japan, together with the other American allies in the region and their Quad partners, are resolved to shape a free and open international order in the Indo-Pacific. Number 3, China, written in a strategic document, has intensified its attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force. However, it is generally perceived that the war in Ukraine raises the hurdle for China's attack on Taiwan higher. It now becomes a little bit less likely that China is going to attack Taiwan. But on the other hand, there were many possibility or elements that we need to be aware about on the possibilities that China will enter a military contingency with Taiwan or with the United States. Number 4, Russian invasion to Ukraine should be seen as an act that actually underlines the very foundation of the international order. Prime Minister Kishida repeatedly insisted on the importance of defending the liberal international order. Russian invasion has been seriously undermining the international order, and we need to defend it. The foundation of international order is now in danger, due largely to Russian illegal invasion to Ukraine, but it is at the same time very difficult to sustain Ukrainian efforts to try to defend its own territories. It's really important for international community to continue supports and aid to Ukraine to continue its war, because otherwise the foundation of international order would be seriously and deeply destroyed. So these are 4 important topics that I like to focus on today. Number 1, let me talk about Japan's new diplomatic initiative in the Indo-Pacific region. In the last several years, I have been saying that the vision of Japan's foreign policy today is the most broadly shared in the international community since Japanese government established the Ministry of Foreign Affairs nearly 150 years ago. So some of these visions, as I mentioned, free and open Indo-Pacific vision, this vision is broadly, globally shared by many countries, leading powers in the world. So Japan is, unlike before, seriously influencing the direction of international order. Of course, the United States has remained the most powerful country in the world. But unlike before, we have seen some of the new trends in the US politics, which show that the American politics is becoming much more inward-looking, as we saw in the presidency of President Trump. So instead of the United States, sometimes Japan needs to replace American leadership role, or Japan needs to support American leadership role, because US politics now face serious difficulty in maintaining stability in the country due to bipolarization as well as the rise of populism. So it is more important than before for Japan to fulfill the gap that the retreat of American leadership has been showing. In the last decade, as I mentioned, Japan has shown important diplomatic initiatives such as the free and open Indo-Pacific vision. We usually call it FIOP, the Quad, the CPTPP, among others. In November 2017, when President Donald Trump came to Tokyo, he mentioned that the United States was willing to support strong Japanese diplomatic leadership that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was showing. It's rare to hear that the United States is supporting Japanese leadership, because we are familiar with the fact that Japan tends to support American leadership. So in the sense, to some extent, Japan is replacing some of the American roles in international community. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was the longest-serving Japanese prime minister in Japanese political history. Prime Minister Abe had shown strong diplomatic initiatives such as above, when the United States President Donald Trump launched the inward-looking American First policies, while Chinese aggressive military activities began to cause larger criticisms. At the same time, after Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has transformed or developed the FIOP vision to the free and open international order based on the rule of law in facing Russian invasion to Ukraine. The war in Ukraine seriously undermines the foundation of international order, as I mentioned. And that would undoubtedly affect Japanese vital interests and security, national security. So that's why Japan needs to do something to help Ukraine. Many Asian countries, as well as African countries, tend to say that it is a European war, nothing to do with us. That's why we don't have to pay our important money to help Ukrainians. Of course, I don't think it's true because, as I mentioned, the war has been seriously undermining the foundation of international order. We are now living in the time of the rule of jungle instead of the rule of law. Power politics now prevails, and nuclear weapons are becoming much more important than before. President Putin doesn't usually regard that those countries which do not have nuclear weapons cannot have sovereignty. As Japan and Ukraine do not have nuclear weapons, President Putin usually doesn't regard Japan or Ukraine as a sovereign state. It means that more and more countries are trying to have nuclear weapons. And with those nuclear weapons, North Korea must feel that they are safer. Without nuclear weapons, countries cannot defend itself. This is what Putin is telling to the international community. And this is undermining, as I said, the foundation of international community or the foundational norms of international community. That's why we must resist it. So we are living in a very difficult time. And we really have to understand the nature of the transformation of global politics in this perspective. Let me next talk about the origins of Japan's Indo-Pacific vision. Why Japan has been trying to introduce a new regional concept of the Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Abe launched a new initiative at the TICAD 6 held in Kenya on August 27, 2016, 7 years before. The main aim of this policy is to consolidate the rule-based international order in an uncertain time. Prime Minister Abe said, quote, Japan bears the responsibility of fostering the confluence of the Pacific and Indian Oceans and of Asia and Africa into a place that value freedom, the rule of law, and the market economy, free from force or coercion, and making it prosperous. The population in Asia living in a democratic country is more numerous than that of any other region of ours. Asia has enjoyed growth on the basis of the democracy, rule of law, and market economy that has taken root there, unquote. There are several reasons why Prime Minister Abe and the Japanese government why Japan was doing it. Why Japan is doing it? Because Japan, China, and Korea, and so on, these Northeast Asian countries see the decline of its population. It means that the market, the size of the market is shrinking in Northeast Asia. On the other hand, we see the rapid rise of population, both in South Asia and also in East Africa. Japan is trying to connect Northeast Asian region, sub-region, with these much more dynamic regions, sub-regions such as South Asia and East Africa. This was what we did in 1970, 80, 90s. In 1970, 80s, we did it likewise to try to connect Japan with Southeast Asian economies. In 1990s, Japan was trying to connect Japanese economies with Korean economies and also Chinese economy. By doing it, Japan could continue its economic growth. So likewise, what I like to say is that Japan is trying to connect Northeast Asian region with the other sub-regions. So this would undoubtedly benefit Korean economy and the Chinese economy as well, because China has been playing a very important role in connecting Northeast Asia with other regions through its Belt and Road Initiative. That's why Prime Minister Abe in 2017 began to support China's Belt and Road Initiative. Unlike the United States, since 2017, the United States government has been showing much more confrontational policy to China, while Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was trying to be closer to China. By being closer to China, Japanese government, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was trying to invite President Xi Jinping to Tokyo in 2020, but because of the spread of the COVID, the trip was cancelled, unfortunately. But anyway, what Japan was trying to do is to provide a quite inclusive regional order, which can also cover China as well. So it is wrong to assume that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe or Japan has been anti-China. What Japan was trying to do and is trying to do is continue its economic growth to link Japanese economy with fastest growing economies in the world. Then Japan and China moving towards the Indo-Pacific rim. Both Japan and China are moving towards the Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean rim. China has been expanding its influence in the Indian Ocean region through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, by controlling ports and important infrastructures. While China's commitment to this region has brought economic benefits, there emerged a larger concern over China's intention and predominance in the region, because China sometimes uses economic coercion to pressure other smaller countries. So Japan needs to provide an alternative vision there, because Japan relies much less those measures. These measures, I mean the economic coercive measure, would tend to destroy the stability in the region, because it means that we need to have much larger military power to do that, to support those activities, rather than relying on those coercive measures. Japan tried to provide a vision, much more inclusive vision, which relies on the concept of connectivity. I will talk about it later. Japan has also been moving its pivot to the Indian Ocean to enhance the openness and the transparency there. Japan's strategy is to create the rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond, as both the United States and the EU also expand their commitments to the region. The Indian Ocean Rim is becoming the new center of global geopolitics. So this is the image that I would like you to remind of. There are two overlapping regional visions. One is China's Belt and Road Initiative vision. The other one is Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. Japan's vision relies on freedom and openness with inclusiveness in it. So it's natural that Japanese vision is much broadly accepted by other countries such as ASEAN, EU, NATO, G7. All of these declare that they are willing to support the Japanese vision of the Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific. So the core of the concept strategy is connectivity, as I mentioned. Connecting economic prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Through this free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, Japan aims to connect subregions within the wider Indo-Pacific region to accelerate economic growth as a whole. Thus, the concept of connectivity is a core of this strategy. Let me quote from a Foreign Minister Taro Kono's speech at Columbia University 6 years before. He said, quote, Japan has been promoting the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. The Indo-Pacific Ocean links rapidly growing Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and North America. It is indispensable for Japan, United States, and like-minded countries such as India and Australia to maintain and develop a free and open maritime order based on the rule of law in this region. Japan also intends to pursue economic prosperity through the reinforcement of connectivity by improving infrastructures such as seaports and the railways and roads, unquote. So you can see that Japan has been focusing on the importance of freedom, openness, and the rule of law. These should be the foundational norms in the region. So there are three pillars in Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Number one, rule of law. Rule of law should be at the center of regional order because China and Russia tend to violate this. Without the rule of law, we need to rely on power, military power, as I mentioned. Asia-Pacific region is now the fastest growing area from the point of view of military spending, much more than the Atlantic Ocean. So it is more likely than before to see the military clash there. We have to avoid it. To avoid it, we need to rely on peaceful means to dispute conflict or disputes. This is what the Japanese government has been trying to do. So Foreign Minister Taro Kono also mentioned that, as a quote, the Indo-Pacific region, which extends from the Asia-Pacific through the Indian Ocean to the Middle East and Africa, is the core of global development, where more than half of the global population resides. I am sure that maintaining and strengthening a free and open maritime order in the Pacific region as a global commons will bring stability and prosperity equally to all countries in the region. So it means that Japan now relies on much more the rule of law, the non-military tools to promote economic growth. I like to emphasize on the difference between Japanese approach and American approach, because American approach relies much more on military tools in the regions, because Indo-Pacific regions in American governmental meaning rely on the concept of the regional operation in the Indo-Pacific region of the American military force. The Seventh Fleet of a U.S. Navy uses the word Indo-Pacific theater. So it means that Indo-Pacific region in the American military meaning excludes Middle East and East Africa. So Japanese concept is broader and more inclusive, and relies much more on economic, non-military aspects of the regional order. Then the United States defined China as the only strategic competitor in its Indo-Pacific strategy. Why Japan is or was tending to rely on much more economic measure to promote the strategy, United States began to rely more on military muscles to promote American version of Indo-Pacific strategy. At the same time, the United States was beginning to much more confrontational to China, while China was trying to see Japan and the United States as a rivals or military opponents to China, to itself. So we can see a divergent approaches between Japanese approach and American approach to the Indo-Pacific region. So while Japan began to accept and support China's Belt and Road Initiative since 2017, the Trump administration began to introduce a new strategy, which based upon the understanding of the emerging U.S.-China confrontation or structural rivalry. Under the Biden administration as well, the United States has shifted from previous strategy of meeting challenges in the Asia-Pacific, the Middle East, and Europe to a new one, which singularly points out China as the only competitor to the United States in its interim national security strategy guidelines of March 2021. This strategy remains the same in the new Indo-Pacific strategy published in February 2022. On the other hand, the Biden administration might have encouraged President Putin to invade Ukraine with its military force due to, number one, the decision of retreating from Kabul in August 2022, and number two, U.S. strategic shift to the Indo-Pacific region. So it's natural to assume that President Putin might have felt more relaxed by thinking that it would be much more unlikely that the United States would intervene in Ukraine. Without America's strong presence in Ukraine, President Putin began to think that now was the time to invade Ukraine. So American a shift of its pivot from Middle East or European theater to Indo-Pacific theater has been causing some of the impact upon the changes in global politics or global balance of power. I will talk it later a little bit more. So United States began to assume that China is the only competitor. It is written in American strategic document that China, I quote, China in particular has rapidly become more assertive it is the only competitor potentially capable of combining its economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to mount a sustained challenge to a stable and open international system, unquote. This, I would say, was largely because of Chinese emerging new strategy. China began to assume the United States as an enemy, Japan as an enemy. Under the leadership of Hu Jintao, President Hu Jintao, and Prime Minister Wen Jiabao, it was thought that cooperation with China was possible and desirable. That's why both Japan and the United States were spending a huge energy to be closer to China. But unfortunately, it was probable that new President Xi Jinping had a different kind of regional vision, much more combative, much more confrontational. And President Xi Jinping began to exclude any leader who would try to promote democracy or political reform, or who would try to expand the freedom or liberty within its own country, like, of course, Prime Minister Li Keqiang. So that's why Li, originally, he was assumed as a new president after Hu Jintao. Many people thought that Hu should have become the next president after Hu Jintao. If we were seeing the emergence of new President Li after President Hu Jintao stepped down, maybe we might have seen radically different kind of international politics. But this was not the case, unfortunately. So I'm not criticizing or blaming American much more confrontational strategy, because it seems that the United States needed to adapt to new international reality. Japan followed the course. So the United States regard China as the American most consequential strategic competitor. It means that it would be probable and possible that China would radically modify the current international order created mainly by the United States. So we cannot easily imagine how the world would like under Chinese global dominance. If we live in China, maybe we can easily suppose how it would be like. But of course, that should be radically different from the current international order. The current Chinese regimes heavily relies on oppression as well as the reliance upon the physical power. So we need to remind that we really have to maintain the current rules-based international order. Then Japan needed to modify its own national security strategy document. Under Kishida cabinet, a new national security strategy was drafted by the National Security Council and approved by the cabinet in December last year. The National Defense Strategy and the Defense Build-Up Program were also adopted based on the new national security strategy. Based on this new strategy, Japan aims to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific vision by cooperating deeply with the like-minded ally and partners. It is stated in the document that China is strengthening its strategic ties with Russia and attempting to challenge the international order. So Japan's national security strategy need to respond to these new challenges that we are seeing now. At the same time, Japan tries to lead to strengthen the international order based on the rule of law. It is also written in the document that Japan, together with as many countries as possible, will strengthen a free and open international order based on the rule of law. Previously, Prime Minister Abe was mentioning the free and open Indo-Pacific vision, but instead, the current Kishida administration is using the word free and open international order based on the rule of law. This is largely because of the increasing link between Indo-Pacific theater and the European theater. These two theaters are interlinked much more closely than before, largely because of the stronger tie between Russia and China. They are helping each other. Without Chinese help, it would be natural to assume that Russia cannot continue its war. So that's why we need to look at the link, much more increasing link between the two authoritarian powers. They are helping each other. They are not just helping each other, but they are helping African and Asian authoritarian regimes with digital devices. Without using Chinese digital devices, African authoritarian leaders actually cannot control the people so tightly. By using surveillance camera and interference in internet connections and the telephone communications, it is now much easier for these authoritarian leaders to control so tightly their own peoples. So it means that the decline of democracy is a serious issue. At the same time, we are seeing the rapid rise of authoritarian regimes. So we call this as digital Leninism or digitalized authoritarianisms, because they are empowered by Chinese digital technologies. Then the next question should be, will the war in Ukraine result in a war in Taiwan? Number one, we need to look at the increasingly closer link between Putin and Xi. They talked last year on the 4th of February 2022. They talked about no limits in their friendship. Russian President Vladimir Putin went to China to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing Winter Olympic Games, and then issued a call for NATO to house the expansion. The two authoritarian leaders in their joint statement boasted that the friendship between Russia and China has no limits. This would naturally result in Chinese and direct and indirect support for Russian invasion in Ukraine. We have to remind that there are so many in China who are against the war. So President Xi has been always sensitive to those opinions because, generally speaking, many people in China feel quite uneasy about Russian killing of the Ukrainian peoples because Ukraine has been very close Chinese friend. China bought a aircraft carrier from Ukraine, and the Chinese military power has been enforced by Ukrainian support. And there are many Chinese students even in Ukraine. So it's natural to assume that many Chinese people feel uneasy that that Chinese government and President Xi is supporting Russian brutal killing in Ukraine. That's why President Xi needs to always careful about how to help Russia or how to not to help Russia. On the other hand, in Japan, 81% of Japanese people respond that they have concern that Russian invasion to Ukraine will link to Chinese change to the status quo in Taiwan and in the Senkaku Islands. If rule of law cannot be maintained in Europe, it would be natural to assume that in East Asia as well, we see the demise and the decline of the rule of law. And because international solidarity now is much less likely, it would be easier for any country to invade the surrounding countries because United Nations Security Council can do nothing without the solidarity. So it means that it is much more likely and much easier than before for any country to invade surrounding country to solve territorial disputes or any political problems. This is the case in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan wanted to solve the territorial dispute with Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh by using military power. This was also the case for Hamas to directly attack and kill people in Israel, and Israel is doing likewise. So more and more countries or political entities are relying on military force because of the decline of the rule of law. This has been caused by Russia because Russia is a member state of the United Nations Security Council. Permanent member of the United Nations Security Council has a special responsibility. If Russia denies a rule, it is quite likely that more and more countries would follow the cause. So Japan is now placed at the center of the US-China strategic confrontation. And then Japan, as a leading defender of the free and open international order, based on the rule of law, Japan is playing in this role. Japan is the first country which defined Russian invasion to Ukraine as an act that undermines the very foundation of the international order. With this, Japanese government has taken a strong stance on its sanction upon Russia, unlike many other Asian countries. Many Asian countries thought and think that this is just a European role, nothing to do with them, that none of their business. That's why there is no need to help Ukraine or sanction Russia, like India, as well as other Asian countries. They are importing more oils and natural gases from Russia because these are cheaper than before. So that's why by purchasing Russian oil, they are indirectly helping Russian invasion and killing. So we need to remind that many Asian countries don't think that this is their war, nothing to do with them. But on the other hand, Japanese government has been saying that this is seriously undermining the very foundation of the international order, which means that the war is something to do with us. In his speech at Washington, D.C. in January this year, Prime Minister Kishida said, quote, Japan's participation in the measures against Russia transformed the fight against Russia's aggression against Ukraine from a transatlantic one to a global one, unquote. Japan has been playing an important role in connecting Europe with Asia, as a hosting nation of the G7 in 2023. At the same time, Japan is trying to bridge the G7 with the global South countries to create a much stronger solidarity in the international community, where divisions are much more obvious. So Japan's strategy today is to be a leading defender of the free and open international order based on the rule of law. Soon after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, Prime Minister Kishida said in his press conference that, quote, the invasion by Russia that just occurred undermines the roots of the international order. We will not accept a unilateral change to the status quo by force or coercion. We strongly condemn Russia and will deal with the issue swiftly in cooperation with the United States and other members of the international community, unquote. One of the most important Japanese tasks in its diplomatic initiative has been to try to deter possible Chinese aggression to Taiwan. Because the war between the United States and China, or between China and Taiwan, would have much bigger repercussion. To prevent it is, I think, one of the biggest tasks for Japanese diplomacy nowadays. So that's why Japanese government always try to link the war in Ukraine with what's happening in East Asia or the Indo-Pacific region. So Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also talked in his speech in SAIS that, quote, this is a moment that will transform history. This is a critical moment, in fact, a moment of truth for Japan. The future of the international community rests on how we respond to this aggression. Prime Minister Kishida also said that, quote, Japan's participation in the measures against Russia transformed the fight against Russian aggression against Ukraine from transatlantic one to the global one, as I mentioned before. So Japan has been trying to see the war as a war which seriously undermined the foundation of the international order. This is what Kishida did at the G7 Hiroshima summit. He tried to create the much stronger solidarity of the international community at the Hiroshima summit. So this is the end of my talk. I once again like to repeat that the war in Ukraine has been transforming international order by undermining the foundation of or foundational norms of the international community. And we need to prevent it. If we cannot prevent it, it would be natural to assume that at some point, China thinks that China can also do it by using its military muscle. But fortunately, I think that the China tend to be much more unwilling to rely on military muscles. China is usually using its cyber war or non-military tools and a psychological war or cognitive war by using its propaganda. So we need to prepare for the much a more influential Chinese operations by relying on non-military tools. Next year, the United States will have an election, presidential election. And also in Taiwan, we will see the result of Taiwanese elections. We have two important elections. I have no doubt that both Russia and China would do everything to influence or to interfere the elections, both in the United States and Taiwan. And if they can get, both Russia and China can get what they want, we will see radically different kind of international order in the coming years. I stop here. And I'm looking forward to having your comments and questions. Thank you very much indeed.